All right, welcome back, guys. Yes, another installment. Last time we ended up on the Puritan family life. We had discussed that for a second. And what we're going to do now is we're going to move on and we're going to talk about the Puritan government a little bit. So, in the eyes of the Puritans, the government had the role of not only keeping order, but also of actively shaping people's behavior. So, some Puritan laws required church attendance. Some banned Quakers from attending church services, and they paid ministers salaries from tax money. So, if you paid taxes to the government, you also ended up paying salary to the ministers themselves. Other laws worked to keep family life as Puritan leaders thought it should be. So, they'd set prices, wages, they would regulate the economy in there. The role of the government in maintaining order was very, very important at this time, especially on early in these colonies. Most of it was serious crimes, murders, assaults, thefts, and all these were rare. So the government itself, it regulated a lot of what you could do, say, even what you were supposed to eat, where you were supposed to go. So that's what happened a lot when the church itself was part of the government. So people took an active role in that. What we're going to go on to here was the Salem witch trials. Now, I know you've heard of this before, you've heard movies of it. So, what happened is there were wild witch hunts. People were scared that there was witchcraft, they wanted to get rid of the witchcraft, and so there were lots of accusations made. What happened in 1672, the community had established their own church and became independent political. So in 1689, Samuel Parris arrived in Salem to take over the duties as a minister. Parris brought with him his wife, daughter, niece, and a West Indian slave named Tituba. In 1692, the church elected to remove Parris as a pastor. At this time, Parris's daughter and niece, as well as another local girl, began uttering what they called foolish speeches that no one could make sense of. A local doctor proclaimed the girls were bewitched. So who knows what they were doing, why they were doing it. Okay, so immediately people suspected Tituba, since she was a slave and not from that country. So Tituba, since she had volunteered to make the girls a witch cake to prove whether they were bewitched, other women were also accused of witchcraft, usually because people thought them stranger or because the accuser had a problem with the person. So if you didn't like someone, boom, call them a witch. Okay. Soon, over 150 persons were arrested for practicing witchcraft. So now we had 150 people arrested supposedly for witchcraft. 19 of these were actually hanged. One man accused of being a wizard was executed by having rocks piled on him until he was crushed. Ooh, not a good way to go. Many others who were accused spoke in defense of other accused witches or who spoke out against the proceedings. So there were a lot of people saying they were accused of witchcraft. They knew they didn't do it, and so they were saying, how could these be witches? I'm not a witch either. So the witch hysteria finally subsided when the government of Massachusetts adjourned the Salem courts and ended the execution. So the governor of Massachusetts stepped in and said, this is enough. This is crazy. You're welcome to research it some more on your own. It's an interesting time period where people just went crazy looking for witches. The Mayflower. Now this is very important. Okay, you'll find out why in just a second. So in September of 1620, there were 100 pilgrims that left Plymouth, England, for the New World. These people landed on Cape Cod. They were pretty far north of where they were supposed to settle, but they decided to stay there anyway, right where they landed. You've done that before, right? You go in your room to do something, you forget what you're doing, and you sit down and you just say, you know what, I'm here anyway, I might as well stay. So they were Puritans, and they want to break away from the Anglican Church, the Church of England. So in 1620, about 100 pilgrims left aboard the Mayflower. They were being funded by the London Company. So think of the other companies, the other people who were also funded by the London Company. And I want you to write down Cape Cod, Massachusetts. That's very important that you add Massachusetts into there. So after the stressful voyage, they finally made it there. And there was an interesting thing that happened. The Mayflower Compact. This was written before the Pilgrims left the ship and went ashore. The settlers created an agreement following certain laws. They said, if we're going to create a new place, then this needs to be specific for us. This document became known as the Mayflower Compact. So this was one of the first real examples of self-governing or governing that our country started. This is where we can see the seeds or the roots of our country's need to govern itself rather than the King of England. All right, Squanto. Hopefully you've heard his name before. We're going to talk about him a little bit. Squanto, or Tisquantum, I'm not very good at pronouncing his actual name, but Squanto is what they called him, a member of the Wampanoag tribe in Virginia. He first came in contact with the white settlers when he and the other members of the tribe were captured by Thomas Hunt, a lieutenant of Captain John Smith. So you catch that? So John Smith as the lieutenant, and then he captures people in this tribe. Hunt planned to take his captives to Spain and sell them as slaves. However, a group of Catholic priests saved Squanto and the other captives. So they taught them English language and English culture and converted them to Christianity. So they were captured as slaves, but the Christians were saving them because they didn't want them to be sent into servitude. Squanto eventually went back to the Virginia colony, and he found that a large number of Native Americans in the area had died by disease that the settlers had brought from Europe. So, living with the Pilgrims, he taught the settlers how to successfully grow corn, or maize as it was known, by planting seeds with dead fish. Okay, think about that for a second. The settlers had never planted corn, so what he showed is how to take fish and use it as fertilizer to keep the plants growing. He also frequently talked with other Indian tribes in order to help Plymouth settlers have better relations with them, but had little success because some of the Indians and white settlers did not trust him. So think about that. He was trying to mediate between the Indians and the settlers, but many of the settlers didn't trust him because he was already converted by the settlers. Squanto himself died of a fever, usually or probably due to one of the diseases, in 1620. First Thanksgiving. This was celebrated in 1621. There were about 50 settlers and 90 Indians took part in it, and they celebrated the first anniversary of the settlement of a good harvest. This was later made a national holiday by Lincoln, which we know Lincoln didn't come around until the Civil War time, so we have hundreds of years till then. So this is 1621, and I want you to think about that. Finally, it wasn't even just about celebrating freedom or being there. It was about celebrating the fact that they were able to grow their own food and have a relationship with the Native Americans. Massachusetts Bay Colony. Okay. This right here was founded by the Puritans. They were able to stay in England longer than the Pilgrims because of King James I was tolerant of them. So the Puritans weren't quite as bad as the Pilgrims, but his death in 1625 made King Charles I the new king, and Charles and the Archbishop of Canterbury, William Laud, were no longer willing to tolerate these so-called Puritans. They were tired of them. So over 1,000 Puritans landed in Massachusetts Bay in 1630, forming the Massachusetts Bay Company. These Puritans claimed a land grant between the Charles and the Merrimack Rivers. More than 200 of them died during the first year, but thousands more came to the colony and continued to grow, so more and more people kept coming. The Great Migration, as it was known, of the 1630s brought more than 10,000 settlers to Massachusetts. But before the Puritans, before their leaving of England, they elected John Winthrop, governor of the colony. He served as governor of Massachusetts Bay for more than 20 years. So there's a great guy, if one of you have this colony, to research and find out, could I become him? Could I tell about people how to be a Puritan, what it was like? So I want you to research him if you can. Dissenters. Look up the word dissenters. See what you find. All right. Now you've had a chance to look it up. I'm assuming you paused the video and then came back. More than likely, you just watched right through it and you're like, Mr. Allen, I'll look at it later. So, although many of the colonists came to the New World in order to enjoy religious freedom, they often did not tolerate, they were considered extreme views. So, although they were coming from England, there were still people that had views that were different. Dissenters, those who questioned the view of the Puritans and the Pilgrims. They were often targeted for persecution and forced to leave the colony. So, imagine if you are leaving England so you can worship a certain way in your religion, and then when you get to the new colonies, you find out that the colonies that left with a certain religion say, well, you can't believe that. So, important people you need to know. Roger Williams and Anne Hutchison. Those are two very important ones that you need to know. Williams had arrived in Massachusetts in 1631 and soon became minister of the Salem colony. There's that Salem again. We will learn about the Salem witch trials. So we know that there's uh, a strong inclination for people just to go crazy with what they believe there. So he was very committed to separating the church and the state. Okay. We'll talk about that some more a little bit later, but what that's saying is the church needs to be its own entity apart from the state. So your church laws are not the same as your state laws. So Williams believed the government officials should have no voice in religious matters either. He said the government officials can't say this is what you must believe in God or a certain thing. So the phrase he used was forced religion stinks in God's nostrils. He said if you force the religion on people, they're not going to be able to stand it. He also publicly stated that British settlers should not take Indians' land without paying the Native Americans for it. So he was also on the side of the Native Americans. Made a lot of people mad. He was soon forced out of Salem and found the Rhode Island colony, which practiced total religious tolerance or toleration. To have religious tolerance means that you allow people to separate out and have their own religion. Here's someone that I would love to see someone take the part and become. Anne Hutchinson. So if you've got a strong disposition and you're a woman that says, hey, I'm not going to take people telling me what to do, Anne Hutchinson's one you want to look up. She questioned accepting religion straight from the Puritan leaders. What she wanted to do is she said that the people have the right to read the Bible themselves and learn what they can. As a result, Anne Hutchinson was convicted of, let me say this right slowly, antinomianism. Antinomianism. So look up that word. It's a word that means going against the church law. Massachusetts General Court banished her and her family, not just her. So she had to move to Rhode Island to practice her beliefs. However, her husband soon died after the move, and the next year Hutchinson and most of her family were wiped out in an Indian attack. So there was also this great need to be safe from the Native Americans while trying to practice your own religion and dealing with other people. The Pequot War. The Pequot Indians upset over the number of white settlers. This happened and continued to grow on and on and on. The more white settlers that came over, the more land was being taken over. So the Indians would start off by raiding the settlers. The settlers then declared war on the Native Americans, and the settlers would use other tribes against them. This was a major thing. What they would do is the settlers would become friends with a certain Native American tribe and say, hey, we will give you guns, we will give you food, we will help with you if you will help us attack these other tribes and wipe them out. The settlers attacked the village and killed almost 400 of them, and this crushed their nation. What this did, though, is that decreased the number of Native Americans. And every time a Native American helped wipe out another Native American tribe, the Native Americans as a whole lost their foothold on the Americas. King Philip. No, he wasn't an actual king, and his original name was not Philip. But after the disaster of the Pequot War, another Native American leader used most aggressive tactics against the European settlers. Metacom, the chief of the Wampanoag tribe, who the settlers called King Philip, decided that the only way to successfully deal with the settlers was to drive them out by attacking them. While the Pequots had used only bows and arrows against the settlers in the 1630s, by the 1670s, with King Philip's war, the Indians had acquired flintlock rifles along with skills to effectively use them in battle. Now, we always think of Native Americans riding horses and shooting bows and arrows, but still at this time there weren't horses widely used everywhere. They were slowly coming over and being used. By 1675, in retaliation for the execution of 3 Wampanoag Indians, Philip's force attacked several Puritan settlements in New England, destroying 12 of them. More than 1,000 settlers were killed in the attacks, and many survivors fled the area. So, in 1647, the settlers went on the offensive, allying themselves with the Mohawk Indians. So once again, the settlers joined forces with the Mohawk Indians, and they'd attack, and they then destroyed the Wampanoag villages. The Mohawk warriors killed Metacom, or King Philip as he was known, and severed his head and sent it to Boston to the Puritan leaders. Okay, not the birthday gift I'd want to receive. How about you guys? Anyway, the Wampanoag tribe was eventually crushed in battle in the area known as Great Swamp in Rhode Island. In total, more than 4,000 Indians were killed in King Philip's War. Just another show that the settlers would join up with one group of Indians and then demolish a different group of Indians, thus diminishing their numbers. Let's talk about proprietary colonies. Once it became apparent that colonies in the New World could succeed, several wealthy and influential Englishmen decided to try their hand at developing the colonies. In their minds, colonization could provide a way to generate substantial profits. So, that's an old term, money, okay? After acquiring a grant of land from the king, the owner could charge rent to the prospective settlers, and then he would have a constant income. So think of renting a house, but rather than renting a house, you're renting a whole state. You own it. People come over and they would have to rent the land. One of these early colonial proprietors, as he was called, was George Calvert, also known as Lord Baltimore. So I need to do that. So then rather than George Calvert or Nathan Allen, I would be Lord Texas, or maybe just Lord Palestine. Might have some issues with that nowadays, though. Calvert received a grant to establish a colony in Maryland, which he saw as a haven for persecuted Catholics, as well as a moneymaker for him. However, Calvert died soon after his charter was approved, and the grant passed on to his son, Cecilius. Maryland was located near more established colonies such as Virginia, and with an economy based on tobacco, was similar to other more established settlements. And because it had tobacco and money, people came. And the more people you have, the more successful your colony is. So it was an upward spiral helping itself. Now, Calvert was given a large range of powers. As a proprietor, you weren't just the owner. You didn't just collect taxes. But in those orders for the colony, to become successful, he had to give a large amount of independence to the individual landowners. So the landowners did get to say some of what they wanted. So while the first Lord Baltimore wanted to make Maryland a total Catholic colony, the number of Protestant settlers soon outnumbered the Catholics. So Cecilius Calvert, he solved the issue by issuing a Toleration Act, which allowed for any religion that believed in Jesus Christ. So he said, as long as you believe in Jesus, you can come here and worship, whatever your religion. So the Carolinas were also established as proprietary colonies. However, two separate cultures developed in the colony. The area around Charleston in the south was more urban, and the northern part was more rural. Let's talk about urban. Urban is cities. So building skyscrapers, we think of urban would be Houston, Dallas. Rural would be Palestine, Elkhart, Grapeland, a small area where you still grow most of your food. Those are examples of urban and rural. So by 1712, the Carolina colony was separated into North and South Carolina. That's why we end up with North and South Carolina, because they were separated according to what their land was growing. New York. All right, New York. This one, I've already separated some of the colonies, so you've got New York, so listen up. This is yours. With the surrender of New Amsterdam by the British, I don't understand. The Dutch, the thing about the Dutch is they were great fighters when they needed to be. They also saw opportunity, and if they were going to lose money, they would move on to the next thing. So they surrendered to the British, and Great Britain gained control of New Netherlands. And before the conflict between the Dutch and the British began, King Charles II had granted territory between Connecticut and Maryland to his brother, the Duke of York. So King James later divided this territory into New York and New Jersey, with New Jersey going to Lord Berkeley and Sir George Cartier. These proprietors, remember that word proprietors, they were in charge of taking care of the land, managing it, kind of like landowners, or just overseers that would also get paid. They made the land available on very easy terms and offered also religious freedom as well. So many Puritans settled in this area, and eventually Berkeley sold his interest in New Jersey to a group of Quakers who settled in the area but then later moved west to New Jersey. So they moved west of New Jersey, sorry, not to New Jersey. The Quakers. Who are they? What are they? Why are they? Yes, where are they? You can ask all the other ones yourself. I'm not going to go through them. One of the most persecuted religious groups of the colonial era was the Quakers. So colonial era, put that in your notes. Yes, that is one of the eras we're talking about when we talk about the different eras of history. That goes right into your entry document. So the Quakers, what does it mean to be persecuted as a Quaker? They believed they could communicate directly with God. Therefore, they did not need ministers or religious rituals in order to achieve salvation. They believed that they could pray and talk straight to God with their prayers. The Quakers believed very firmly of the doctrine of the inner light, which means that a certain element of God's Spirit resides in each person, and therefore each person was capable of understanding religious truth.